Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Today, we'll be talking about a topic that is quickly becoming more critical to our municipalities, communities, and organizations. As the frequency and severity of major events that cause sustained losses of power increases, so do the financial and real life impacts on our government, businesses, and the well being of our society. So today, we'll be scratching the surface of a way to defend against some of those impacts through resiliency of our energy infrastructure. I'm Joe Mankiewicz, and I'm joined by my associate, Jeremy Keller. We're with Ameresco. We are opportunity developers. Jeremy has been with our company for nearly 10 years. He is a mechanical and energy engineer who has been designing and developing numerous infrastructure projects across the Northwest for over 20 years. I've worked on the optimization of building and campus performance and infrastructure improvement for the last 5 years. And prior to that, I was a nuclear submarine officer in the U.S. Navy for 12 years. Here's a little bit about Ameresco. We're an international company based in Framingham, Massachusetts. We operate with a very strong local presence across 70 locations in the U.S., UK, and Canada. Our local Portland and Seattle offices have grown since 2012 to design, implement, and fund infrastructure improvement projects to all of our customers in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, and Hawaii. We're founded in 2000, and Ameresco is a leading independent provider of comprehensive services, energy efficiencies, infrastructure upgrades, asset sustainability, and renewable energy solutions for businesses and organizations throughout North America and Europe. Ameresco has successfully completed energy savings, environmentally responsible projects for federal, state, local governments, healthcare and educational institutions, housing authorities, and commercial and industrial customers. Every industry is affected by energy and power consumption. Every industry and our environment could benefit from energy services, efficiency improvements, and resiliency infrastructure. This is a quick snapshot. Some of our projects, and we talk about here are projects delivering numerous benefits to our clients' organizations. This slide is not about Ameresco, but it shows the impact of the projects that we have implemented with our customer partners and the renewable energy assets that we own, operate, and maintain. While we've shown our international reach and across the US, we truly are a locally focused company. We've developed customer partnerships and infrastructure improvement projects right here in Central Oregon and across the Northwest. From solar arrays and LED streetlights in the city of Bend to building controls and interior lighting improvements in Redmond and Madras, saving our communities nearly $500,000 per year in utility costs and improving the quality of operations right here in Central Oregon alone. Now, as we go through this, we're going to pose some questions. Just a quick pause for everybody to kind of self-reflect on what we're talking about. So we're transitioning to the topic of the day. And as we go through this presentation, Jeremy and I will pause and let you read these questions. And they're meant to keep in mind and apply your own organization as we describe the topics further. So the first are just kind of basic situational questions. Are energy and power critical to your operations? What parts of your organization would be affected by a loss of power? Pretty simple questions, but we'll dive into them here in a little bit. We start by defining resiliency. So we like to start defining resiliency by comparing it to reliability. Reliability is a more common organizational priority today. It's related to resiliency. The difference between the two is that where resiliency addresses infrequent, large-scale events, reliability addresses frequent but less significant events. For example, a tree branch that falls onto a power line and causes a temporary disruption to a confined area of the grid represents an example of reliability. One that also merits attention, but is different from the set of issues that utilities face in rebounding from a single large event that affects an entire region. Resiliency cannot be achieved through standalone technology or service. It's achieved through a thoughtful consideration of an organization's mission, the risks it faces, maintaining that mission, and its existing infrastructure. And it's a long-term planning effort. So we'll talk about that more today. Let's start with the basics. This is our current energy, traditional electric grid, right? Our current energy distribution grid. And it's in place for decades. Generation of electricity at a distant power station, transmitted through high capacity lines, through transfer and distribution stations, delivered to your home or business. It's reliable, centrally controlled, long distance, and large. This also leaves it susceptible to threats. The continued aging grid infrastructure in the US, compounded by a lack of investment in new systems, will only lead to greater downtime. In fact, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave the US electric grid a rating of D+ in its 2017 infrastructure report, asserting that Americans will likely experience longer and more frequent power interruptions in the future. So, in addition to the challenges presented by rapidly aging infrastructure, climate change will certainly increase the risks faced by our organizations as major weather events become stronger and more frequent. In fact, in recent years, major weather events such as wildfires, quite applicable recently to our communities here in Oregon, and hurricanes and major snowstorms have left our cities without power for days or even weeks, which exacts a high cost in terms of operations and quality of life. The graph to the right shows consistently increasing number of disturbances in the US electric grid due to weather, vandalism, equipment malfunction, and a growing sector, cyber attacks, and a few others. So let's talk a little bit about the problem. In the next section, we'll explore ways in which our government agencies, your companies, and communities can leverage their energy infrastructure to minimize the adverse impacts of major events. In other words, become more resilient. So let's pause for a moment to read and think about these questions in the context of your own organization. So the risks and challenges we just discussed are rapidly emerging, and we have seen them increasingly in our daily lives, news feeds, and frankly, right out our living room windows. That's a bit dramatic, but on the flip side, they have emerged concurrently with a shift in your organization's ability to leverage your own infrastructure and energy assets to be able to manage and mitigate these risks. To date, much of the interest in resiliency has been limited to a few key sectors. However, a wide range of organizations, and public and private, are beginning to understand that they can use their energy infrastructure to become more resilient in budget-sensitive ways. With a smart approach to resiliency that integrates innovative technological solutions, contracting structures, and participation in broader energy markets, organizations like yours can often become more resilient in ways that fit within your existing capital and operating budgets for energy and infrastructure in order to better achieve your long-term mission and your values. So let's touch on the types of risk associated with major events that cause loss of power and energy. We see two main types of risk: mission critical and business revenue. And we'll talk about the third in a second. Mission critical operational risk is often associated with hospitals, government facilities, water and wastewater infrastructure. These sectors have been among the first investors in resiliency, in part because of the critical nature of their operations to human health and national security. They have been willing to make the early investments in resiliency because they recognize that the lack of resilient infrastructure can have a catastrophic impact on their operations. So business and revenue risk directly correlates to efficiently run companies who, in many instances, operate their facilities around the clock. Power outages, in this case, can be very costly to production, spoil inventory, and create very large downtime and revenue risk. And there also emerges a third type of risk, which kind of combines aspects of the first two we just talked about. The third type of risk is community risk. And as we've seen, extended loss of power leads to degradation in a community's quality of life, loss of income, joblessness, and disproportionately affects low-income areas. So how can we revisit and update our organizational priorities to prepare for these risks? How does building upon our existing infrastructure to make it more resilient affect our existing organizational priorities? We talk about this in kind of three different categories. Energy management is one of them. So by moving away from the exclusive reliance on grid power and toward distributed generation, organizations can exert greater control over their energy costs and also create a hedge against fluctuations in future energy prices. There's a lot of innovations these days in technology and also in project finance that have opened new ways for these organizations to take advantage of distributed generation in cost-effective and low-risk ways. Long-term fixed pricing contracts for power from solar PV and cogeneration or combined heat and power are now comparable in price, or even cheaper in some cases, than grid electricity. Beyond these value propositions, a new market is also developing where demand response programs put on by your utility that compensate resiliency-focused assets for providing transmission and distribution grid services, such as frequency regulation, offer additional opportunities for organizations to generate revenue and further drive down your energy costs. In terms of climate decarbonization initiatives, many organizations, particularly large corporations and the federal government, have aggressive carbon reduction targets. A number of and range of sizes of organizations all across sectors have also have gone as far as setting targets for 100% renewable energy. Investing in renewable energy technologies, such as solar plus storage, provides an opportunity for these organizations like yours to increase your resiliency of your facilities while simultaneously meeting your climate targets. And the third category is emergency services. So during major events, public facilities such as K-12 schools, public universities, they become temporary shelters for those affected. Resiliency-minded municipal and state authorities have installed systems such as combined heat and power and solar plus storage at key facilities to support these types of emergency efforts. For example, during Superstorm Sandy in 2012, a combined heat and power system installed in New Jersey's Salem Community College allowed the campus not only to provide its own critical loads, but also served as the only Red Cross emergency center in Salem County. These investments not only protect the public infrastructure, but also transform them into support facilities when emergencies occur. And think about in our areas in Central Oregon, throughout the Pacific Northwest, have we set up these institutions for that type of resilient infrastructure to be able to support in these ever emerging emergency situations. So we're going to take another quick moment to pause and read these questions. And as we move into discussions on how to address the risks that we've just covered. So think about how your operations, business, and quality of life can be affected by a sustained loss of power. And I will hand it off to Jeremy to take us the rest of the way.
So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about how technology can deliver resiliency benefits. So going from kind of the abstract to more of the physical. So we talk a lot about distributed energy resources, DER, and that encompasses a lot of different things. Distributed renewables like solar, PV, combined heat and power from either natural gas fired generators or biogas or other biomass generators, that sort of thing. Microgrids can encompass all of this, but they're also kind of their own separate thing. Energy storage is becoming very, very cost effective and is really enabling a lot of these resiliency discussions we're having. Demand response is a way to increase the value of these resources during normal operations. And then, the thing that brings it all together, kind of like with the rest of all of our lives, is just the increasing capabilities of software and technology to integrate and make everything play well together. So, the key thing that we think about for resiliency, and it's just one piece of it, like Joe was talking about, but is the microgrid. And a microgrid is essentially a step up from an emergency backup generator. And so kind of how it works is most of the time the power is on and everything's just humming and nobody pays attention. But in the event that the grid goes down, that microgrid will automatically island, which is to say separate your building or your facilities from the grid and then continue to operate. And typically that's with really no notice from the occupants. And then the microgrid is a combination of backup generator, batteries, distributed solar, additional building controls, and it operates to maintain that grid operation for an extended period of time. So an example might be that the grid goes down for an earthquake. The microgrid comes up, the facility islands, the batteries are charged, the sun is shining, the solar is carrying the load, night comes, the batteries are slowly discharging, they get to a certain point, and maybe that generator kicks on to recharge them. Maybe when the grid goes out immediately, a less critical load inside of a building or a less critical building is going to be shed and turned off. And these are the sort of dynamic decision-making tools that software of the microgrid enables. And then once the utility and the grid comes back online, the whole system will reintegrate back into the grid, again, without really any requirements of the operators or the staff and without really a notice and change of power at the buildings themselves. And then the other piece of a microgrid is that unlike an emergency backup generator, the microgrid is also providing valuable benefits to the facility and to the grid during normal operation. And so you get both emergency and resiliency benefits, but also everyday benefits. So kind of just to highlight that, it's an integration of microgrid technologies, advanced controls with renewable energy assets and emergency backup traditional sources with the community to provide, energy and grid resiliency, improving the value of some of those distributed energy resources as net metering and those sorts of tariffs continue to change. It can help provide some economic growth, integrates more clean energy resources. And then for more and more folks, it's providing an energy choice. For a very long time, we've been subject to the monopoly of the local utility. They have done a great job, but choice is valuable. So a couple more questions just to kind of consider. So, how would you define resiliency for your organization? And does your existing infrastructure support a resilient energy program? And then as you think about solutions and financial paths, is there one that exists to make your organization more resilient? And how would you go about exploring that? So now we're going to start to talk about kind of the different pathways of investing in resilient technology. And when you're evaluating these investments, there's a whole bunch of different things to consider. But it kind of first starts with understanding what is resiliency for your organization. And we've harped on it with all of these questions, but for a power loss that extends beyond the amount of fuel that you may have in a backup generator, and when it becomes a challenge to get new fuel into a region, what does that look like for your organization? And what is the value of that? And so it kind of starts with identifying, the existing site and the existing assets and what you have in place and potential. Understanding too where your specific site fits inside of the existing energy markets and regulatory space. Different locations have different energy resources. Each site has more sun, different locations have more wind. Maybe you have a hydro opportunity or a biogas solution nearby. And then it's also talking about, every different location has different government and utility incentives and programs. Federally, there's investment tax credits for solar that can be applied towards energy storage with certain considerations. But then different utilities in different states have other benefits. California has some great benefits or rebates for installing energy storage systems, and Oregon is getting there. And then wrapping all of that is talking about the funding and the financing considerations, and how do you get these projects built in a cost-effective way. And so where do you start? Well, we like to think that it's important to find a good partner. It's a complicated space. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. And so we look at it as a potential pathway for partnership to develop these projects. Ameresco does the feasibility studies, and then we do implementation and design build type pathways. But there's a lot of folks out there in this space that are really developing these, the ability to deliver these projects. And then beyond that, it's also really about understanding the funding solutions and different contracting pathways. Public agencies have a much different procurement pathway than a private company might. And there's a lot of different ways to go about that, where maybe a third party owns and operates the system and you earn the benefit under a long-term contract. Or maybe you're excited to own it yourself and bring that funding, and we can help line up low-cost financing. And there's a wide spectrum, and really, again, it fits inside of what your organization is, where you're at in a debt cycle, capital planning, operations and maintenance, and a lot about how comfortable are you with the technology and taking that risk. So we have some pretty good microgrid experience. We kind of go from small to bigger here. The top one is a federal office building that we did in San Diego. We happened to pick 3 federal projects. And that's, batteries combined with rooftop solar. The middle one was a marine base where we added new solar and a new battery system and a new combined heat and power system. And it's integrating load shedding of their buildings and their heating distribution system and their domestic hot water along with their electricity into one holistic energy system for the site. And then below that is a slightly larger project at the Philadelphia Navy Yard that again integrates a natural gas peak shaver plant with some solar and we did have a battery there before, but a lot of controls to manage the loss of power and manage utility bills. Thanks, and we'll answer any questions now.
All right, and we'll transition to Q&A in just a second. Thanks for your time.